All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. This episode is brought to you by Progressive, where drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average. Quote now at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, national average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, October 10th, 1957, a waitress at Howard Johnson's restaurant in Dover, Delaware, refused to sit Komla Gbedemah and his companion, who had stopped at the restaurant and ordered a 30-cent glass of orange juice. The waitress handed them the juice in to-go containers and said, quote, "Colored people are not allowed to eat here." Now, who was Komla Gbedemah? Well, he was the finance minister of the newly formed nation of Ghana in the U.S. to raise foreign investments for an infrastructure project in his country. After reporters learned about this incident, word got to President Dwight Eisenhower, who apologized to Gbedemah directly and invited him to breakfast at the White House. So, here to discuss the Howard Johnson orange juice incident, Eisenhower's apology, and a really fascinating story that mixes up African colonialism, American segregation, and all sorts of larger Cold War era questions around these topics are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there. Why do I feel like this is the precursor to the beer summit?
Yes.
Had to throw that out there.
No, I mean, look, did you see this headline from the time? There's an article that says the headline is, quote, "White House breakfast smooths over racial incident." And it's like, well, there you go. You know, it's like the same thing with the beer summit. Let's just get together and talk. Though I think it's a little different here because,
right.
Yeah, it's a little different here
diplomacy.
because it ends up having like this real sort of economic, diplomatic impact because of what Gbedemah is in the country to do. Mm-hmm. But let's start there, I suppose. So Ghana is an independent state at this point for a few months, and Gbedemah is in the United States to try and find foreign investment, right?
And develop relationships with the United States. I mean, we're right on the cusp, 1960s, where you get the major wave of African independence, where over 17 countries, I believe, get their independence sort of simultaneously. But Ghana is first. And so by sending their diplomats to come to the United States to build business relationships, make certain inroads and connections, a lot of these diplomats are in Washington, D.C., but also in New York City at the UN. And they're traveling back and forth from New York to D.C., which is usually a quick 4-hour road trip. So on the way, you might stop to get gas or stay at a motel or a hotel or get something to eat. And a lot of these restaurants that typically we would think of as being above the Mason-Dixon line, like Dover, Delaware is not something that we think of as being a part of the South. But there are these incidents, and more than a few, of African diplomats being treated poorly and being discriminated against for who they are.
Dover, Delaware, just for what it's worth, a few miles north of the Mason-Dixon line. I have Maryland roots. I think there's this really fascinating question about, does that part of the country count as north or south, and in all sorts of different ways.
But Delaware was definitely on the U.S. side during the Civil War, so that's correct. That's definitely north of the Mason-Dixon line. This was a huge issue, not just because it was establishing relations with a new country, but we're talking the middle of the Cold War here, where the non-aligned world, these countries as they're coming online as independent states, are being wooed by both the U.S. and the Soviet Union because they want them to be allies in the Cold War. And there was this pretty intense belief that you were either with us or against us. Like, you didn't get to stay non-aligned. And in this process of trying to make the case that you want to be on the side of democracy and freedom and prosperity and all the good things that the U.S. has to offer in the Cold War, what do these diplomats experience? They experience the racism and the exclusion and the hatreds of the United States, which for Eisenhower and then Kennedy is a real problem in trying to win the Cold War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Kellie, there's this whole, I think, lineage of Black people from other parts of the world in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, probably even much further in the 80s, 90s, coming to the United States and all of a sudden being read as Black in the United States as opposed to Black in their home country, and this sort of interesting dynamic. I'm curious what your thoughts are here. And then obviously it connects in all these other more geopolitical ways.
Well, yeah.
But at a personal level.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's funny because, I wasn't surprised that this incident happened because I was aware of these incidents, but at the same time, I find it interesting because usually when African, foreigners come to the United States, they're given the foreigner privilege or pass. Oh, you're not Black, you're African. Or, the idea is that they're not co-opted yet or not yet corrupted by this system. But, back then, things are very clear cut, very black and white, no pun intended, in terms of how people are treated, whether you're African or whether you're American or whether you're Dominican. You can be susceptible to racist discrimination. And so it's interesting to me that at this time, a lot of these Black African leaders, highly educated, affluent, all of that. And it's interesting because Gbedemah basically says, listen here, lady, I have higher social status than everyone in this restaurant. You want 30 cents for this juice, take this $1 and I don't want your juice and you'll hear from me later. There's definitely a class dynamic that's also at play that I think a lot of Africans get rude awakenings when they come to the United States and realize that even their wealth doesn't really matter because your Black skin is what counts the most.
Mm-hmm. Gbedemah says, quote, "If the vice president of the United States can have a meal in my house when he is in Ghana, I cannot understand why I must receive this treatment at a roadside restaurant in America."
Right. And to go from that to a meeting at the White House, this is something that happens in the early 60s as well, is the person who is denied service goes right into the Oval Office to complain about the treatment that he received. And so it's a matter of wealth and social status. And as Kellie was saying, there was this kind of protection even in segregated areas when wealthy non-American Black people came in. It didn't always happen that they were served. They often were not traveling in the Deep South, but they were traveling in places like Washington, D.C., and they were often exempted from the segregation rules of the society, but not at the HoJo.
No. And you have to remember, Kwame Nkrumah becomes the first president of Ghana, attended Lincoln University. We did an episode on this earlier in talking about Lincoln and HBCUs. These were people who were also not completely unfamiliar with the United States.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Eisenhower's response. He gets wind of this. It's a few months later, invites Gbedemah to meet at the White House. And, outwardly he says this is deeply embarrassing. And he gives a quote and says that, we as a government, if we're going to be true to our founding documents, have to work hard to eliminate this kind of discrimination and so forth. But as we've been hinting at, it does seem for Eisenhower there's also this much more geopolitical, tactical rationale here, which is he's starting to realize that it is really hard for the United States to position itself as the leader of the free world and the sort of, one of the big poles in the Cold War when at any given moment, the Soviets or other countries can point to the United States and say, who are you to tell us what real democracy looks like when you haven't even cleaned up your own house?
And the Soviet Union takes advantage of this. I mean, there are propaganda posters from the era that are images of like the Statue of Liberty holding up the torch, and the torch is lighting a cross on fire. And it's powerful propaganda, because how do you argue against it? They're not wrong.
No.
And this actually, right? And so like these images that are coming out, in 1957, of having tanks in the street trying to integrate Little Rock High School, or these images that would come out in the 1960s of Black people being beaten, of having dogs sicked on them. The Soviet Union sees that as wonderful propaganda. And it's part of the reason why the needle starts to move on civil rights legislation, because you have Eisenhower and then Kennedy saying, we got to do something.
Yeah, this is bad optics
for us.
Yeah. Not just bad optics, but like bad policy, bad everything. And that if we don't get a handle on it, they won't be able to control the narrative, much less, control these negotiations that are happening with other countries. And a lot of these countries, let's not be mistaken, they have choices, real choices, in who they choose to make partnerships with, and choose who they choose to have invest in their new country. And so they're being very strategic about how they think about these negotiations and who they want to be tethered to.
I'm sure the answer to this is yes, and you will name a bunch of books, but this idea of a history of civil rights legislation in this country being in many ways the product of foreign pressure and geopolitical considerations is super fascinating to me. You want to shout out the books that have been written?
Go ahead, Niki, and I'll tell my book.
Which I'm sure exists.
I mean, one of the foundational works on this is Mary Dudziak's Cold War Civil Rights, but there have been a lot that have been written since then. I don't know, Kellie, if there are ones that you particularly like.
I mean, I love Hidden Figures, and I love Hidden Figures because, not just because it talks about the African-American women who worked on the space project, but, she asked, I think, a very serious question, which is, how much sooner could we have gone to the moon had we not been racist? Had we not been discriminating, maybe we get to the moon, I don't know, 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier.
Right.
But those are very real questions to ask.
Right. And those very tangible considerations for someone like Eisenhower in terms of winning the Cold War or the space race, or in this case, economic investment, often are the thing that move the needle. And so I think we should start to wrap up here with reminding folks that we're talking about here is drumming up foreign investment in Ghana. And more specifically, Gbedemah is here to try and find foreign investment for a dam, the Akosombo Dam on the Volta River in Ghana, which is going to be a major, major infrastructure project, in many ways kind of they saw as the economic engine to Ghana's future. And it is at this juncture that the United States and Eisenhower realizes, there is a real opportunity for American investment and American involvement in this dam project. I want to shout out Adam Curtis, one of my favorite documentary filmmakers, who has a whole episode of his Black Power documentary kind of about this, but that series is all about sort of like economic colonialism. But, that's just this very interesting moment here where now this story transitions and morphs into this situation where Americans see an economic opportunity out of this. And in this basically follow-up meeting where Eisenhower is apologizing for this interpersonal slight at the Howard Johnson, he ends up also saying, and you know what, I'm going to hook you up with some oil and mineral executives here in the United States, and they're going to come in and they're going to invest in this dam. And we know how that script tends to play out. They cut really unfair deals, they extract wealth, and now all of a sudden, we start to morph towards a different kind of colonialism. Yeah. But it's all sort of, it's just so fascinating how it all starts to tie in together.
It's crazy. We should also offer the postscript. The Howard Johnsons basically say, we will not discriminate. Anybody who wants to come into our establishment is welcome to come. They also have to do a little bit of a PR cleanup.
Well, talk about economic incentives being the thing that drives it at the end of the day too. It's like at some point Howard Johnson's is like, well, anyone's 30 cents is 30 cents. I guess we should take it.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Let's wrap it up there. That brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Kaula Nakua helps with transcripts. Julie Shapiro is executive producer for Radiotopia. Get in touch with us if you have any questions or comments or ideas for the show. You can email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com, where you can also get our full archives, transcripts, and learn lots more about the show. Follow us on social at thisdaypod on Instagram and Twitter, where we are posting stuff each and every day. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon. Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. If you feel like you're wasting time and money with your current business software, or just want to know what you could be missing, then you'll need to join the millions of others who have switched to Odoo. Odoo is the affordable, all-in-one management software with a library of fully integrated business applications that help you get more done in less time for a fraction of the price. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Odoo, modern management made simple.
Radiotopia.